This past week, I did something that I've been talking about doing for what seems like forever, and I moved to New York City. In my life, I've had many moves, but this is undoubtedly the biggest move that I've made. For context, I've spent the first 21 years of my life living in South Florida. When I was 20, my family decided to move up to Atlanta, and I decided to stay in Florida. I moved into an apartment, and I entered college for the second time. It took about 3 weeks of going to college before I remembered how much I disliked school, and as soon as the amnesia wore off, I was lost. I had no direction in my life, and I was living day to day unconsciously. I was uninspired, and I lacked any fulfillment in my life. After 12 months of living on my own, my lease expired, and I decided to move in with my family up in Atlanta. Not because I wanted to, but because I had no other options. Well, except for that one other option where I was gonna backpack through a different country for a few months and hopefully find myself, but I was convinced not to do that. That was actually one of the biggest regrets of my life, but that's a discussion for another video. When I moved up to Georgia, I felt weak and depressed. In my eyes, I had attempted to move out and spread my wings, and I had failed miserably. I hated myself. I hated that I lacked direction. I hated that I barely knew who I was, and I hated that I felt like I have been sleepwalking through my entire life. Every time I entered my bedroom, I was reminded of my failures and my shortcomings. What I didn't know at the time is that Georgia was actually where I was going to find myself. What I didn't know was that I was going to have some of the best times of my life in Georgia. Georgia is where I found my passion, met many friends, and created many memories. And the passion that I discovered was stand-up comedy. Before I performed comedy for the first time, I had tried many things in my life, but nothing has ever resonated with me the way that stand-up comedy did. The day I performed for the first time is a day that my life changed forever. And after 3 weeks of doing stand-up comedy, I knew that that was what I wanted to do with my life. Comedy made me feel the literal opposite of what college made me feel. The fact that I discovered comedy was great, but there was a big problem. I don't drive. I was born with a visual impairment, and my lack of vision makes me unable to drive. Living in Georgia and trying to make it as a comedian without driving is nearly impossible. The open mics are far apart, and I would need people to drive me to all of them. On a good week, I would be able to make 3 open mics. 3 times a week just simply isn't enough to master a craft. This left me with only one option. I had to move. Initially, New York wasn't even an option. How would I be able to afford that? The idea of moving to New York was absurd to me. But the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized that that was the only place in the entire country that would work for me. In New York, you could go anywhere, whenever you want, without needing a car, and the stand-up comedy scene is the best scene in the entire US. So when I made my decision, I ended up getting a job in an Italian restaurant, and I worked there for over a year saving up money for my move. During my time in that restaurant, I met some of my closest friends, and I had some amazing experiences. I can confidently say that so far, 2023 has been the best year of my life, which is why saying goodbye last week was so difficult for me. But it was something that I had to do. That chapter of my life is over, and it's time to turn the page. Leaving my home in Georgia for the last time filled me with many intense emotions. I think the emotion that I was feeling the most was grief. After all, my time in Georgia was dying and turning into a memory right before my eyes. I would never wake up in that bedroom ever again. I would never take a trip to Buc-ee's with my coworkers after our shift to Provitos ever again. As I was leaving my home for the last time, I felt nothing but pain. In fact, my emotions were so strong that I felt sick. I felt like I needed to throw up. The first 30 minutes on the road were rough, but eventually those unpleasant feelings turned into excitement for my next chapter. In one moment I was in pain, and the next I had a smile on my face, and I was overjoyed for what the future has in store for me. I've now been in New York for 1 week, and I'm absolutely certain that this place sucks. It's loud, cold, rainy, busy. Nah, I'm just kidding. This place is awesome. I fucking love it here.